This is how to teach social studies and history role-play negotiations. Role plays are great. Role plays are often exactly what administrators say you should be doing in your classroom. They're highly student centered, they involve critical thinking, they have flexibility and creativity for students, they're experiential learning, they're fun. But as I'm guessing you're here, the reason you're watching this video is for, can be very impractical and very scary for a new teacher. They can go really wrong. Students don't take the activity seriously. They can break character and go into stereotypes or just not know what they're talking about and end up talking about anything. There can be students who do nothing, and keeping accountability of them or giving them a grade is very difficult. And there's time concerns. What happens if the lesson ends in 2 minutes? The kids just come up to a basic solution or something, and they don't know what they're doing, and they just end in 2 minutes, and then you have nothing to do for the rest of the period. So it's the really scary stuff that kind of drives you away from doing this kind of thing in your first couple of years of teaching. So here's a method I think that addresses all of these concerns. Here's our method for role-play negotiations. First, you want to break down the role-play into only two sides. For example, the North and the South in the Compromise of 1850. Each student will only get one half of the negotiating points as described below. Each student is going to get a worksheet that's half of all the information, just their perspective only. On each worksheet, provide a very brief introduction about who the student is. For example, in the Compromise of 1850, I literally say, you are a Northerner and you hate slavery. Or I say, you are a Southerner and you like slavery. And who their opponent is, just the opposite, what do you put on the other person's sheet, and what they need to beat their opponent in a negotiation. Just that, you are here to come up with a negotiation or a compromise. The other side wants the opposite of what you want. You need to win. That's the only thing you need to put in that introduction. On each worksheet, break down what was being argued about into a smaller number of points. So like 4 or 5 arguments total. These arguments are going to take a while, so you really don't want to go over 5 in about an hour period. For each side and each argument, you write the basics of why only that side is right. For example, the Northerners get a worksheet saying, number 1, on the issue of California. California should be a free state. The people there say slavery won't work in gold mines, which is a very valid argument. While the Southerners get a sheet saying the North and the South made an agreement to split the country via 3630. As California is half below that line, it should be half slave. Again, while I strongly disagree with the South side as a teacher, this is, again, a valid argument here. It's very critical that both sides have a meritorious, valid argument for each of the arguments you're presenting. So number 5, you're going to pair the students and have them read the conflicting arguments for the first issue. They're literally going to do the concrete thing of just reading what's on their paper verbatim to the other side. If they can't reach a compromise, that's okay, and they have to return to it later. They can just stare at each other and say, well, I think California should be a free state, and the South say it should be a slave state, or it should be split. And they can just stare at each other, and they can be stubborn if they so choose. The students can bundle issues as they see fit. For example, if they can't come up with a compromise on just number 1, maybe they get something that they want in number 1 and give up something they want in number 2. And they can reach creative solutions so long as those are realistic. All right, make clear that the students both have the same series of compromise listed in their final answer, word for word. So they're going to have a compromise sheet. What your opponent writes, you have to write. You have to come up with the same agreement, or you haven't really solved anything. Optional, I actually do this all the time. I think it's really fun. You provide grade incentives to the side that did better than the real life historical compromise. So competition is fun for students, and you want them trying to win. And for your summative, this is how you're going to be able to grade the students. Have the students write a short paper comparing and contrasting their results to the real compromise. Possible questions to answer. Was your end result even, or did one side get the better end of the deal? And why do you think that? What was the best thing that you won in your compromise? What was the most costly thing you had to give up? And why, of course. Always make them justify it. Did you do better or worse than your side did in real life? Was the real compromise fairer or less fair than what you negotiated? So you're connecting the student's experience to what really happened. And why does this work? Number 1, most importantly, it's pragmatic. When students who immediately try to do nothing by saying, I don't know what to do, you can give them something concrete Read what your paper says to your opponent. I want you to literally just read this to your opponent while your opponent listens. Then I want you to have your opponent read back from their paper. And then you simply ask, who should win here? Who should get what they want? And it's like a natural thing that kicks in. Students like to compete with each other. Students be like, well, I'm right. And the other student's going to say, no, I'm right. And then you can just kind of walk away. And you just, you say like, hey, this is up for you to figure out. I don't know who should win. Number two, this provides freedom within structure. The students do most of the talking and are free to be creative with their solutions, but the roleplay boundaries require them to stay on topic. You can lower students' grades for coming up with impossible solutions, so they tend not to do that. And number three, the students are more likely to learn what actually happened in the compromise than if you had just listed on the board, because they want to compare what they did to see if they did better or worse. Because they've actually experienced this, because this is experiential learning, they're far more likely to remember the compromise and to think critically about it and do all those higher level thinking that you want them to do than just putting the compromise on the board and having them memorize it.